This is Mikey Borup for PremiumBeat.com, and in this After Effects course, you will learn the basics to advanced features of After Effects: interface, shape layers, motion tracking, compositing, and more. During these tutorials, feel free to pause, rewind, and ask questions. I will be using After Effects CC version 12.2, but most of the techniques learned can be used in older versions. In this video, we're going to be covering motion tracking and stabilization. So let's fire up After Effects and get started. So here I am in After Effects, and I've got a new composition. It's called Tracking, and I've got a bunch of footage in here already. Now, there's actually 5 different ways to do tracking in After Effects. I'm going to show you all of them and how they're different from each other, and so you can see which one to use, because not every tracker works for every piece of footage. One tracker might be better for one piece of footage while another might be better for another. It just depends on what you're trying to do with the track. So first, let's start with this very first piece of footage. And if you don't have the tracker window open, I've got mine down here in the bottom right hand corner. You can come up to Window and then go to Tracker. See, I just turned it off, turned it back on, and there's my tracker. And in there you see Track Camera, Warp Stabilizer, Track Motion, Stabilized Motion, and the 5th one is using masks, and it doesn't really show up here at the time, but there's a way to get it there, and I'll show you that later. The first one I want to show you is Stabilized Motion, and it's really kind of wild, and I want to start with this one because it's very extreme. And so here is the clip. There's a lady just jump roping, and so what we do is we select the layer, click Stabilize Motion, and I just want to stabilize position. Now, when you do a track, you can there's different things. There's position, there's rotation, there's scale. You can check one of these, all of these, or none of these, but there's no point in doing none of them. But for this one, I just want to do position. When you're doing a track, you want to have a track point that's high contrast. And so this is how the track works. So we see the little X or the cross right in the middle, and that is the point at which your track and your movement is going to be applied to. This inner bounding box is what it is looking for to track, and the outer bounding box is where it is looking to find this inner bounding box. So for something like this, where she's jumping up and down, I'm going to put this right in the center, take this inner bounding box, make it a little bit bigger, so it's about this big. And then this outer bounding box, since she's only moving up and down, I don't need it to be wide, because the bigger this outer bounding box is, the longer it's going to take to track, because it's searching all of these pixels to find a pattern that matches this. So since I know she's only going up and down, I can make this more tall. And I'll make it probably about that big. And at this point, we need to analyze the track. So if we look down in this bottom right hand corner in the tracker window, we've got this analyze 1 frame backward, analyze backward, analyze forward, and analyze 1 frame forward. So what I want to do is, since I'm at the very beginning of the timeline, I'm just going to analyze forward. And it's going to go along. And I'm not going to be too picky about this, because I just want to show you what the stabilized motion does. And then later we'll get into some different types of tracks. Almost to the end here, and then I'll just hit stop. Okay. Now when you do the stabilized motion, every time you do a track, you need to apply that tracking data to a layer. With stabilized motion, it usually applies it to the layer that you're tracking. The other ones, it's better to apply it to a null. But just to make sure, I'm going to click here where it says Edit Target. Make sure it's the right layer. That is the right layer. Click OK. We got Position, and now we just come down to Apply, and it'll ask me to apply the X and Y. I click OK, and then let's go into this, and let me show you what's going on. It actually comes in here, takes all that tracking data. If we go into the Transform, it's changing the anchor point. Now you can see this lady right here in the middle of her body. It's staying put, it's staying centered, while everything else is kind of moving around. It's kind of a really unique look, but that's what stabilized motion is. It'll stabilize around a single point that you track. Let's go on to the next type of track. Let's track motion. And this works a little bit differently. In order to do track motion, I'm going to want a null object. So before I start, I'm going to create a new null object. Let's call this track motion. And then let's go into this layer. And what this is, let's look at this video. It's an airplane flying in. And if you've ever seen the TV show Person of Interest, there's lots of tracking and where they've got security cameras and it kind of tracks people and objects and things like that. So I want to do something similar to that. And so I'm going to track this airplane as it flies in. And so I need some good tracking points. And since it flies in and then gets smaller, I want to track both position and scale. So let's start it right here where these two wheels are there. And I'm going to now hit the track motion button. And then I want position and scale. And when you do position and scale, it's going to give you two trackers. So let's bring this up. Put the inner bounding box about the size of the wheel. Make this a little bit bigger, and then do the same thing with the other track point. And let's start by analyzing backwards. That went off the frame, and I'll just come in here afterwards, after I apply it to a null, and I'll keyframe that by hand. But let's go back to where we started at this point right here, and let's track forward. And that's going pretty fast. I can always pause it, hit track again. Okay. And it's starting to get a little bit weird here at the end, but that's to be expected with all of this fencing here. So I'm not going to go through the whole track because you can kind of see what's going on. And if I wanted to really do this really nice, I would come in here and really adjust some of this. Right, it gets a little bit weird where this fence is, and this is not the best clip to show this because of the fence here in the way. But I want to show you this now. If we go here to edit target, let's change this to the track motion, which is number 3. I should have named it track motion null, but it's right there. Click apply, click OK. And this is where I want to keyframe this. So now we can see, as I just keyframe that at the beginning, just enough for it to go off. And you can see that that is following the wheel of the plane. So now let's create kind of a shape around this that it's kind of following, like it's a computer tracking the plane. So I'm just going to do a shape layer. Let's do a square. Let's come into the rectangle and delete the fill. And I'm going to just simply take this and parent it to that null. I'm going to go ahead and hide that null. I'm going to go ahead and change this to track motion null just so I don't get confused. Okay. And then we see that is now tracking that plane. So that's kind of cool. And it's fitting with the scale as well. Now let's go to the next type of track, which is the mask tracker. And the mask tracker works a little bit differently than all of these other trackers because it's not here over in this tracker window. And you can't take this data from the mask tracker and apply it to anything else. It can only be on this layer. So first off, we need a mask. I'm going to grab the ellipse tool, make sure that my layer is selected. Let's duplicate that layer. We'll call this mask tracked, and we'll take the second one as in mask base layer. So let's go to the track layer, and I'm just going to come in here and let's mask around that wheel. And then in order to bring up the masking position, it will automatically do it anytime you have this tracker window open and you create a mask. And if you don't see it, then you just right click and click on track mask. So since the way this is moving is just positional data. There's not really any rotation or anything like that. Then I'm just going to have the method on position, and I'm going to click track. And I'm not going to do this whole track because it is going to take a little bit of time, but you can see how it's tracking that wheel shape. Now this is a rigid mask tracker, and what that means is it's not going to deform and change shape based on what's going on in the scene. So you can see right here it's already starting to not really fit as well. But let's take a look at what it did. If I take this base layer and turn it off, you can see that it's tracking just that wheel. And so what I can do is I can come to this wheel and I can now do an effect just on that wheel. So let's go to color correction, maybe brightness contrast. Let's make it orangey. I'm going to come into the mask. I hit F to bring up the mask feather. We can feather that a little bit. And now we've got a different looking wheel. So that's the mask tracker. Let's go on to these last two, which is the warp stabilizer and the 3D camera tracker. And I save these for last because they're kind of some more of the newer features and they use the same technology. And it's different than the other trackers because you're not picking a point. After Effects will pick all the points for you. So I'm going to click on this one and let's do warp stabilizer. And I just hit the button and it's going to go through and it's going to analyze this frame by frame and find all of the individual little tracking points and automatically stabilize it for you, and it does a really good job. I'm going to fast forward through this because it takes a little bit of time. You can see it's only 30% through, and then we'll see what it looks like at the end. So it's done going through and stabilizing this, and let's take a look at what it did. I'm going to render this really quickly so you can see how stable this is. So there's not a lot of movement. You can still see the original movement, but look how smooth it is. You know, I guess this would actually help if I showed you what this looked like before it was stabilized. So let's just duplicate this layer. Let's take this top one. Let's turn off the stabilizer or just delete it. And this is what it looks like before it's stabilized. See, it's definitely a handheld shot and everything's a little bit bouncy. Now let's go into it with it stabilized. And look how nice and smooth it is. Looks like it was done with a glide cam or maybe on a tripod or something like that. It'll automatically go in and increase the scale just so it won't miss any of the edges. Now there's two versions you can do with this warp stabilizer. If I come into here, it says smooth motion here, and I can change the smoothness. So if I bring it up to 100%, it's going to be a lot more smooth. Down to 0, a lot less smooth. I can change it, what method, position, scale, rotation, perspective, subspace, warp. And there's all sorts of features. But if I come in here to smooth motion, turn it to no motion, it'll go through and it'll re-stabilize it. It doesn't have to reanalyze it, just re-stabilize it. And as I go through, let me just render this really quickly. You can see how absolutely still this is. It looks like it was all just taken with a tripod and it's locked down. So it does a really good job, and I've overall been really impressed with the warp stabilizer. So if you just need to stabilize your footage, then the warp stabilizer is the way to go. Now the last one is the 3D camera tracker. And what the 3D camera tracker does is it uses the same engine, I guess you could say, as the warp stabilizer, where it's finding all the different points and figuring out the movement, but instead of stabilizing it, it's figuring out how the camera is moving, and it's creating a camera in After Effects based on that. So really cool stuff. So here is the movement. Nice little camera movement going on. And so what I want to do now, I'm going to click on the layer and I'm going to do track camera over here in the tracker. Click on the button and it's going to go through this very similar thing where it's analyzing the background and then it's going to then stabilize it. And again, I'm going to fast forward through this because it's going to take a little bit of time. It's only up to 15%, and we'll see when it's done. So it's all done solving for the camera and tracking. What I'm going to do now is just to clean up this timeline. I'm going to go ahead and shy all these layers. And let's turn on the Shy Guy just to clean it up. And if you didn't know that, you could just do that, be able to hide some of these layers. They're still there and they'll still be active, but you just can't see them. So now what we see here is all these little points. And as I hover over them, I'm getting these little targets. And they're making triangles. See, I get a target when it's, see this point, and that point. Go in between them and it creates a triangle. And what it does is as I scrub through this, you can see those points it's tracking all along and it's creating the movement of the camera. Now, in order to get a better track, I can come in and say delete some of these. I just highlight them, hit delete, because in this shot, this actor, he's moving a little bit, and so these I know aren't going to be reliable track points. And so in order to make the camera movement better, I'm going to just delete those. And there's a few more. Now that I got that, I'm going to go in, have it solve for the camera again. I just had to switch this to something else, and then it resolved the camera. Now, you can see that those points are mostly gone. There's still a few of them there, but that's okay. I think that's still going to be a pretty good camera solve. And then I'm going to hit the button that says Create Camera. Now that that camera is there, I can do some cool stuff. So I come in here, make sure the 3D camera tracker is highlighted, and I'm going to grab, let's say, just this green point right here next to this notebook. Right click on it, and I can create text, solid or null. I'm going to create a text. Let's come in and make this text larger. I'm going to rotate the text, rotate it down. And then what we can see here is that's going to track in right there like it's on the desk. Let's go ahead and render that so we can see it in full speed. So that does a pretty darn good job, and it's right there, right where those points were. So I can do some other cool stuff with this. Let's take this text. I'm going to move it back in Z space. I can move it up, and I can have this look like it's just sitting here on his little background to his desk. Let's maybe take this, add a layer style to it. Maybe come into the text and add a gradient. Let's maybe add a little bit of color to this. And I'm just doing this really fast. And let's render that out. And it doesn't seem to be right in the right spot, but that's fine because what I can do is I can come back here onto this layer, click on the 3D tracker, and I can grab one of these points. Let's create a null object right at that point, and let's come into the position of both of these. I'm going to grab the position of null, copy it, and then paste it onto the text. And now it should be in the right spot. I just need to move. And you can see that looks pretty cool. It looks like it's right there on that back of his desk. So that is the 3D camera tracker. Now, with all of these tracking, the track's is only going to be as good as the footage you have. So if it's really hard footage, really shaky, not high contrast in what you want to track, it's going to be hard to get a good track out of that. So be aware of that when you pick in your footage or when you're creating your footage in order to track, that you need to have good high contrast because that's what it's looking for in like the track motion and stabilized motion. It's looking for contrast and pixels, you know, and with the camera, it's looking for set points that you can see throughout the entire track. So like with this one, all of these pixels and all these points, it's able to see throughout the entire movement of the track. So it knows which way the camera is. And I can come in here, which is kind of cool. Let's come into this custom view. Let's highlight the camera. And you can see the movement of the camera. It's pretty cool, isn't it? So that is the tracking. Remember, there's 5 of them. Let's go over them again. We've got the stabilized motion, we've got track motion, we've got mask tracker, we've got the warp stabilizer, and we've got the track camera, which is a 3D camera tracker. Thank you for watching and participating in this course. Feel free to comment and share this video with others. In the next video, we'll be talking about 3D, cameras, lights, the ray trace renderer, and Cinema 4D Lite. Again, this is Mikey Bort for PremiumBeat.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.